Thank you for having me. I'm going to tell you 3 quick things about me. I don't like to do a whole, like, here's my professional bio, and la, la, la. There are only 3 things you need to know about me. 1, I am actually from New York, so I don't live here anymore. And the reason I tell you that is that if I occasionally slip into fits of profanity, which I will try not to do now that I know we're recording, you'll have to forgive me. The second thing you need to know about me is I am not actually a security person. Although after 24.5 years of faking it, kinda, sorta. I am actually an MBA bean counter weenie who stepped into cyber by accident in 1999 and haven't scraped it off my shoe yet. And the third thing you need to know about me is, yes, I do in fact work at JetBlue Airways, where my remit is currently threat intel, threat hunting, SOC, incident response, attack simulation, and detection engineering. Basically everything that has to do with threat or detective controls rather than preventative controls. And I only tell you that part for 2 reasons. 1, it's germane to my talk, as you will see. And 2, New York's hometown airline. So let's hear it for JetBlue. All right. See, I got to stay close to the mic. All right. Next thing you need to know. I always like to start with icebreaker. Thank you. All right. We are going to do a little icebreaker. And I am going to encourage you all to participate because you will win valuable prizes. And by valuable prizes, I mean cold, hard cash, folding pocket money. All right, show of hands, who knows what that is? Awesome. Okay, keep your hands up. Now, in the context, those of you who know what this is, in the context of that picture, for 1 greenback, can you guess what, just shout out, this is? Initial access, and he's sitting closer than the other guy. Would you pass this down to the gentleman in the green shirt, please? All right. Cold, hard, folding money. So, see, now you've cracked the code. What's this one? Persistence could, you know what? I'll give you credit for that because I go to the gym about once a year, so I'll give you credit for that. It wasn't the one I had in mind, though.
Either elevation or escalation. Lateral movement.
All right. You know what? I just got to start handing out money. All right. All right. You said persistence.
Thank you.
You said escalation, which is also true. And who said lateral movement? Yeah, lateral movement. All right. By the way, I had to rob the 7-Eleven to get this many $1 bills. Would you kindly help me out with that? Thank you. All right. Click. What's my point? Any Douglas Adams fans? Okay. I love MITRE ATT&CK, and it's not just because I'm a Katie Nichols fanboy, although I am also a Katie Nichols fanboy. I love MITRE ATT&CK because it gave us a common language. I'm also a former linguist. I speak a couple of languages. I'm also annoyingly anal retentive about definitions. I believe the old adage that a problem well defined is half solved. And MITRE ATT&CK gave red teamers, blue teamers, purple teamers, vendors, government officials a lingua franca where when they say T1504-B sub C number 2, we all can look it up and agree that means persistence on a Windows box established by modifying a registry key. Hallelujah. 20 years as a vendor and the last 3 defending a Fortune 500 enterprise. Let me tell you, just being able to talk to each other is a huge win. So, I am a big fan of MITRE ATT&CK. It's a Rosetta. Sorry, was there a question? No? Okay. You can raise your hand or shout or scream at me. I got a thick skin. I've done 700 of these. So just talk over me if you need to. Or tell me I'm wrong, by the way. I called this talk how metrics mess and blah, 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 and how we can fix it. We are going to fix it. Not me, we. All of us, the community, practitioners, students, academics, attackers, defenders, because nobody else is going to. Okay, I just cheated one of my later slides. I love MITRE ATT&CK because it is that Rosetta Stone. It allows Ian, I don't know if you're here, but the guys from Tidal Cyber to say, here are the most common TTPs for initial access this month. And a guy who's writing sim rules can be like, oh, cool. And a guy who's working at the company that makes your mail security gateway all go, ah, yes, I see. Poisoned email attachment with Excel with a VBS script that downloads a bash script that downloads bootloader that ultimately lands in royal ransomware. Got it. And everybody can look at that attack chain with its little tags on it. We all know what we're talking about. Now, I mentioned that I also run, among other things, threat intel and hunting and detections. I also run or oversee SOC and CIRT. And that kind of common language and mutual understanding of what everything means when we talk about the job that we do is also, anybody here ever work in a SOC? Okay, so the same is true of metrics when you work in a SOC, right? No? No. Okay, by the way, I totally blew my first joke. The icebreaker is Russian. I was going to do a whole, anybody here говорит по-русски? No? Здорово. Очень приятно. So, I was going to do a whole thing with an accent. I was keep doing callbacks through the whole talk. Anyway, no more funny. Now is serious part. Yeah, okay. Show of hands. If you have worked in a SOC, cold hard cash, can you raise your hand or, yeah, raise your hand because otherwise I'm going to run out of dollar bills too fast. Raise your hand, I'll call you. If you have worked on a SOC, what is one of the things you should measure or track in a SOC?
SLAs. Mean time to measure. MTTR.
Okay, what does that mean?
Mean time to respond.
And you said?
Mean time to resolution.
You two guys just made the whole point of my talk and you don't even know it. Dollar for you, dollar for you. All right. Sorry if I, shorted somebody a buck. Come see me after. Okay. I wasn't kidding. You just made the point of my whole talk. In the first 5 seconds, 2 people who have experience working in a SOC said MTTR. And he said mean time to respond, and he said mean time to resolution, or vice versa. Anyway, thank you for making my point. It's I'm from New York show, right? It's a mess. It's a disaster. So I decided to, being an old MBA bean counter weenie spreadsheet guy, I decided what else to make a spreadsheet. So I reviewed 30 sources from credible people. I would do air quotes with both hands, but I got to hold it. Anyway, you get the point. It was so bad, the data was so bad that I had to reduce it to 12 more formal publications like white papers or blog posts from the chief something or other from 12 security vendors who have collectively raised $2.5 billion from people who are supposed to know what they're doing. Okay? So let's just leave aside the fact that I had to drop 18 out of the 30 sources because they were so bad they were unusable. Here's the top of the pile. Ready? It contained, and by the way, my Google searches were things like SOC KPIs and key SecOps metrics. Okay? It contained pearls of wisdom like this one. Hang on. Who said mean time to respond? Define it for me. I'll give you another $1. Double your money.
The time it takes for you to go through the incident response process.
Thank you. Would you hand that down to?
I need my tip.
All right. I know this is not fair to you, but I know, Sheen, you get a delivery charge. All right. So it's a small industry. I'm old. I know a lot of people. All right. So here's my point. Your definition was actually clear, and it included an endpoint. Congratulations, you are now better than 11 of the 12 vendors who collectively raised $2.5 billion in funding. Here's my first pearl of wisdom before I had the good fortune to meet you, sir. Mean time to respond is the average time it takes to respond. I believe, being an old spreadsheet guy, this is what Excel calls a circular reference problem. Okay? More pearls of wisdom. So I'm going to go in ascending order of people's money, right? Because MBA bean counter guy. Is time to detect. The time it takes to become aware of an incident. Maybe. Fetish for definitions. How about first we agree what, both become aware means and what an incident is. CIRT. Sorry? I'm going to let these guys off the hook because they only raised $800,000 of other people's money. Come on, clicker. Is it, I didn't make these up, the time to become aware of IOCs and other threats? So if I become aware of JetBlue.com being registered or going live, is that when I start the clock or when I stop the clock? If it's when I stop the clock, when do I start the clock? If it's when I start the clock, when do I stop the clock? These guys raised like $30 million in funding. But let's go with somebody we all know. If you've been around this industry at all, you know Mimecast. Theirs was time to detect is the time to identify an attack. So is that when the alert goes off, or when the person reads the alert, or when the person decides the alert is not false positive and it actually is an attack? Or, I don't know. Do you? It would be helpful if they'd actually explained that in their white paper about SOC metrics, but they did not. That is better than the one from Cypher. Oh, by the way, Mimecast, $90 million in other people's money. Cypher just listed time to, and time to, and included no explanation at all. Awesome. Okay. My personal favorite, and you'll see why, and obviously I'm not afraid to name and shame. My personal favorite is the time it takes your security team and technology is to notice abnormal behavior. First of all, I think we all know, especially you students on the college bar scene, that noticing abnormal behavior is rather subjective. And second of all, you cannot have one metric for both when the control notices and when the human notices that the control noticed. My favorite part of this story is the company is called Security Scorecard. Okay. Now, mean time to detect can mean a lot of things. There's ambiguity. Okay. But mean time to respond or we would hope MTTR is better. And by the way, those are the only two that people consistently quote or think of, MTTD and MTTR. And I think we've shown that you can't really get consensus on that. So the average time to respond to a cyber threat is the mean time to resolve. Okay, for anybody who's been an incident responder, my whole life just changed. Responding is resolving? I don't have to do any work. This is awesome. All right, I think you're getting the point. I haven't actually seen which Marvel movie this is from, but I'm told it's a really famous quote, so I kept it. All right, by the way, forgive me for putting my phone over here, but I have no idea how fast I'm going, so I'm going to keep an eye on the clock. There's one on the screen. Who'd have thunk it? Okay, I'm doing fine on time. In fact, I'm probably going a little fast. So let's talk about the actual data, not from the 30 sources, but just from the 12 that were credible enough to have raised billions of dollars in capital. Spreadsheet guy. There's my fancy spreadsheet. In case you want me to do the math for you, that is 46 instances of 13 different metrics. My favorite part of this one is that if there's nothing else we could agree on a SOC who's, no disrespect, again, I oversee one, their job is to sit there, stare at things, and when they go ding, notice them. You would think that we could at least get agreement on the fact that mean time to detect, whatever detect means, should be on the list. 9 counts for time to detect. 12 sources writing white papers and thought pieces on key SOC metrics. In other words, 25% of the people in this business do not think that time to detect is an important metric for a SOC. I'd slam my head on the desk, but it'll mess up the recording. Okay. Of the publications that I included in the data set, this is the number, other than the fellow in the audience, that actually provided definitions that were both explicit, meaning it was clear what they meant, and that definition was then functionally usable, as a guy who actually has to report metrics and run a SOC? 1. Hat tip to Logarithm. I should note that it took their CTO authoring the piece to get it vaguely right. And by the way, they were not great. They were only the best of a bad bunch. Okay. Now, I assume that you all have your opinions on these next questions, or you wouldn't be sitting here, or the red team side was just too incomprehensible to go to, so you're like, well, what am I going to do till the 5 o'clock? Either way, here's the part that the MBA weenie bean counter cares about. So what? Why do any of us care about this? Why are we talking about it? Why am I talking about it? Why are you listening to it? Okay, let me break that down a little further. This lack of common metrics, this lack of a common language, what MITRE did for TTPs and doesn't clearly exist for SOC and incident response as business processes, why is that a problem? If we fix it, what do we get for all the trouble? And if we agree that it's worth doing, which I will try to convince you of, how do we do it? Okay, let's take a step back. I'm going to ask anyone to go out on a limb. This is not a right, wrong answer. There are no right answers. This is an opinion question. Cold, hard cash. If you are a practitioner, if you work in a SOC or a CIRT, or you fiddle a SIM or an EDR, or you basically do intel or threat hunting or engineering or anything that has to do with securing an enterprise or an organization, here's my question. Why do we have a job? Any of us. Any of us in this field or students who want to be in this field. Why do we have a job? Trying to double his money.
To keep the business operating so they can continue as an ongoing operation.
Thank you very much. Doubled your money. Anybody else? I got a couple of bucks left. To get paid. No. That's why we do it. Why does the job they pay us to do exist?
Because people are dumb and click on things. And
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with that statement, clearly. I think I got $1 left.
Lights on.
Keep the lights on. No wrong answer.
Have someone to throw under the bus.
He should get $2, but I don't have that many. All right. Like I said, I have been doing this for 25 years. There's no right answer. There's no wrong answer, so I'm going to give you my answer. And I know this seems like a tangent, but it isn't. It's at the core of my talk today, what I'm talking about, and why I'm talking about it. We may take the job to earn a living, but the job exists, I would argue, for only one of 4 reasons. And you are welcome to raise your hand and tell me something we do as cyber professionals or IT security professionals that doesn't fit in one of these buckets. I haven't found one yet, which is why I held at least $1 in reserve in case you can prove me wrong. All right, here we go. I propose that everything we do in cyber boils down to one of these things. Ready? Reduce the likelihood of a loss event. Loss can be money, loss can be data, but basically, this is your preventative controls, your SSDLC, your network security architecture, doing all the stuff right so you don't have to deal with the problem later. Keep the bad guys out, which is, as I said, exactly the half of cyber domains that I do not do. I work in domain number 2, which is assume that that failed and the boogeyman is in the house, right? Intel, hunting, draft detections, institutionalize them, SOC playbook, escalation, a CIRT playbook. And then when you think your controls are in order, you test it because an untested control, an unvalidated control is not a control. It's a hope, right? If you haven't tested it, assume it doesn't work. Detect faster to reduce the likelihood of damage from that event. Ensure compliance. I know this is the one that most people in cyber roll their eyes and they're like, oh, he's a NIST 871. I promise you, there are fines for regulatory violations that will dwarf any ransomware payment. Okay, the government can impose bigger fines than Russian criminal gangs can. I guarantee it. Don't believe me, ask Equifax. Okay, the obvious joke. Finally, defend the brand. And for those of you who hardcore security geeks who want to open a C prompt and think that defending the brand doesn't matter, defending the brand, I used to work with a very large investment bank, and they said when we started doing threat intel, this was third of our 3 priorities, right? Keep operations going, minimize financial losses, oh yeah, and protect our brand. Over the 15 years of evolution of both their thinking and actor sophistication, that literally reversed. They now consider defending their good name more valuable than the loss from any particular event. Okay, so today's talk is about this one. Okay, defend faster. Detect faster. Riddle me this, Batman. Why does that matter? And by the way, does anybody have something in cyber that does not meet one of those 4 domains? I challenge you. Pen test, vulnerability management, SOC, CIRT, SIEM, take your pick. Okay. The one we're talking about today is detect faster. Why? Because dwell time equals damage, period. Right? The dwell times on some of these well-documented cases are unbelievable. Guy gets in on a Tuesday, and it's not like they run through the network and crypto locker everything on Wednesday. The average dwell time before the really adverse event happens is like weeks or months. That's a lot of time to read your intel, draft your detection, run a threat hunt, put things in with your SOC. There's time there. Shorter time, less damage. Full stop. I just clicked it. Okay, so what do we get if we fix it? Less damage. Pretty simple, right? We do this better, we do it faster, we have less damage. Okay, so lots of pictures, lots of stories, lots of hand waving. All of a sudden, I'm going to get into the, where's the guy with the stopwatch hard part, right? Because up here, right now, I'm just philosophizing, waving my hands, telling stories. How do we fix it? Okay, it is we. It's all of us. Literally, I have a colleague, not where I work, who is struggling with the following. They're relatively new to their job. They have been asked to report metrics for the performance of their SOC and incident response functions, and they cannot make the numbers line up except by doing monthly gymnastics with a spreadsheet because they have a SIEM, a SOAR, and a ticketing system that do not agree on the definitions of time to detect, time to respond, time to contain, time to mitigate, time to remediate, time to close, right? If you're using Sentinel-1, Chronicle, Cortex XOR, and God help me ServiceNow, and they don't line up, you're literally, and by the way, of course, half of them are local and half of them are GMT. And by the time you put out your monthly metrics report, it's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. You get to the end, you got to go back and start because the other end's rusted again. That's all this person does, is put out these stupid reports because there is no common language between the systems that are producing. So how do we fix it? I have a proposal. I call it the B6 timeline model. Bonus question. Oh, by the way, I should say, I promised him I would do this. This is largely the brainchild of me and a brilliant young engineer named Andrew Malone. If you like it, I get all the credit. If you don't, andrew.malone@jetblue.com. Feel free to send your critiques to him. All right, bonus prize. I'm actually going to go big here. $5. This is a trivia question outside of security. Anybody have any idea why I call it the B6 model? It is our IATA code. Hand that man a finster. Thank you very much. So if you ever get a ticket on JetBlue Flight 1545, your ticket actually says B61545. Thank you. I don't want to put it out. I'm not looking for credit for me or JetBlue. I had to call it something. Here we go. Can we agree that, and I know there are outliers and we could argue about DDoS, which I would argue is actually not a security issue. It is a resource exhaustion issue, which is not actually a threat in the same sense, but that's a get me over a beer. Can we agree that there is an initial, generally speaking, if we're looking at a MITRE type event, there is an initial compromising act, okay? Somebody gets in, initial access, right? Then, click. There is some amount of stuff that happens, and then, God willing, unless your time to detect is infinite, a control goes ding. Now, the reason I put brackets around letter B is because depending on whether what they're doing is something very well known and your EDR recognizes it and goes ding, or it's not, where your EDR sucks, which by the way, all of them do. I believe traditional EDR is dead, and that's another talk at another conference. But that could be measured in milliseconds or months, right? So for all practical purposes, initial compromise and detection can be 1 millisecond apart or an unknown amount of time. Okay, but then there's an event that's detected. The human picks up the alert from a queue or a control or a thing or a pager or whatever. Yes, I'm showing my age. And then the analyst goes, thing, not a thing. I don't know if it's a thing. Generally speaking, if a tier 1 SOC cannot dismiss it as false, and there's false positive and false alarm. I got a whole thing on SOC terminology too. But let's just say if they can't dismiss it as not a thing to worry about, then they have to investigate it if they are 2, 3, 4s, or they escalate it to a CIRT team that can. Stop me if I'm like missing anything or a generic timeline, right? And then they take some mitigation actions to stop the bleeding or whatever, will at least contain the damage. And then there's ultimately some kind of return to actual normal operations. Now notice I do not say pre-event, because there is often not a restoration to pre-event circumstances, conditions. There's only, we're back to the new normal based on what happened to us. And then finally, when all that is done, the business is operating a month later, Mandiant drops the thud factor 50-page report on the desk and goes, here's the story of how you got buggered. Great. We good on the timeline as a generic series of events, kind of circa MITRE attack? Okay, so here's my question. Based on my research of all these thought-leading companies, is this time to detect? Alert goes ding to the time the analyst looks at it. Okay? I could ask you what is, but stick with me. You say no. Anybody say yeah? Okay. Is it the time the alert goes ding to the time the analyst decides if it is or is not a thing? I agree, but I have seen publications that argue that is time to detect. How about from the actual act of compromise to when the alert goes ding? Is that time to detect? Alert's gone off, no one's picked it up out of the queue, and they don't for another 17 hours. Is that time to detect? Or is it when they pick it up out of the queue? Or is it when, from the initial compromise to the time they decide it's a thing? I think you get my point. So which one's time to respond? This one? Or this one? Depends where you set the end of the slider on time to detect now, doesn't it? Maybe this is time to triage. So if that's time to respond, maybe that's time to triage, depending on whether you start with the alert or the detection, the human peeling off the alert, or the judgment of the alert, or the initial. You get my point, right? When does the watch start and stop? I don't know, and neither does the industry, and that's my point. Okay, so here's our proposal, just as a conversation starter, which is how I marketed this talk. We propose that the event starts at the initial act of compromise. Okay? Agree, disagree, you can beat me up at the happy hour later. At least I'm putting a stake in the ground. And the detection ends not when the control goes ding, because if the control goes ding and the guy misses that alert, your time to detect is infinite. And trust me, that happens in the real world. So I'm going to argue that for the sake of argument, the B6 proposal of the day, and we iterate on this thing all the time, is the time to detect is from the compromising event to the time the human looks at the alert. If that's true, then we would argue that time to respond is the window between when the alert goes ding and the time the analyst looks at the alert. Not judges the alert, not determines whether it's a thing, just ding to peeling the sticky off the top of the queue and going, I wonder if this is a thing. Now this is really important, and by the way, I have 5 more. But this is really important because I want you to get the idea that the first one is actually the aggregate of 2 things. The time from the compromise to the ding, and the one in purple, the ding to the human. In other words, we are not judging just the human or just the control in the red one. It's an amalgam. Okay? I would argue that time to mitigate is from when the alert goes ding to when you have stopped the bleeding. That's not return to normal operations. You've isolated the machine, you've chopped the thing with the fiber with an axe, whatever you need to do to at least stop things from getting worse. Okay? Time to triage is the time from ding to, time to mitigate. We just did that one. There it is. Can't see a damn thing anymore. Time to triage is review of the alert to deciding whether it's not a thing or they need to escalate it to the CIRT team. Time to resolve is from peeling the sticky to return to normal operations. Got 2 left. Again, we can argue all of these. I just want you to get the idea. I am trying to get the rock rolling down the hill the way that we needed MITRE. We need to talk about this until we get to a consensus. Here's the last 2 you probably hadn't thought of because they're not timed to anything and they don't appear on most people's SOC or CIRT dashboards. 1 is the exposure window. That is the time from the initial compromising act to the time you kick the bad guy's butt to the curb, not return to normal. That's total incident duration. So, that's a proposal. It's like this equation. Is it right? Hell if I know. I'm just telling you what I think. There is no right. There is no consensus, and there is no body, there is no standards body, there is no ISAC, there is no organization of erudite professionals or robed elders on a mountaintop that is making these decisions. So I am proposing that together we do that. So is our version the right version? Hell if I know. I'll probably change it by the time I get back to the office. But here's the thing. I can tell you that while I don't know whether it's the right answer, we better figure it out. And I'll tell you why. And this is why I said there are 3 things you need to know about me. 1 is I'm profane. 1 is I'm a security professional at an airline. And 1 is that by background, I'm a bean counter. Okay? So, question for the group. I got $1 more. Which of these does management care about most?
Incident duration, exposure window.
Who said exposure window? You're second. He's first. Would you pass that along? Thank you. Sorry. Pass that down to the man in green. I had 1 more. Doubled his money. Okay. In that order, that's what management cares about. When all is said and done, okay, put it in my terms, if we ever had a really bad day, which thank God in my 2.5 years or so with the airline we have not, when all the mess has been cleaned up in aisle 7, right, Robin Hayes, our CEO, is going to have 2 questions, right? He doesn't care how long between when the ticket went ding and when the guy looked at the ticket. He's going to go, how long ago did they get in? How long was my ass hanging out in the wind? When do we get back to normal? Because I've got to go tell the board and the street the answers to those questions. And you better have them, Olson, or you will find yourself on the street, right? All the stuff between A and F, I guarantee you that a publicly traded CEO doesn't know, doesn't care, never heard those words. All he wants to know is, why did it take you so long? And how bad was it? And how fast did you fix it? Okay, so as a guy who is not a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but as a guy who runs Intel and Hunting and SOC and CIRT and all that crap I told, excuse me, sorry. Oh, it was so close behaving myself. All that stuff I told you about. Why do I care? What do I care? Not why Robin cares. Why do I care? I am a disciple of the Church of Drucker, like most MBA weenies. And people often, including me, misquote it because it's a great phrase. You can't manage what you can't measure. The actual quote is, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So what does that have to do with anything? Let me back this up one more time. If we agree axiomatically, definitionally, that green is always too long. Let's say you have 10 incidents in a year. And I'm just making up to make the math easy. And the average time is 100 hours. And everybody goes, oh, that's bad. 100 hours, that seems like a lot. And you need to make it better. Maybe you have MBOs to make it better. Maybe your job depends on making it better. If you don't know which component of the green line was 98 of the 100 hours, you can't fix it. If the guy picked up the ticket and 1 minute later determined it was a thing, 3 minutes later isolated the machine, and in 5 minutes it was all cleaned up, but the total time was 100 hours, why the hell did it take 99 hours and 45 minutes to find the problem? Or vice versa. If the control went ding in 1 millisecond, right? And somebody saw the alert, and then they went, I think this is really bad, and they escalated to the CIRT team, and turns out the CIRT team is in the Philippines, and they're on holiday that day because you didn't know it was National Go to the Beach Day. You lost 36 hours, and you don't know which bracket your time stinks in, then you can't fix it. You're not going to fix, we need to fix total incident duration of 100 hours. We need to get that down to 80 hours, Bob. Total incident duration is a summation. What you need to know with granular visibility on agreed definitions that require people and tools to have a lingua franca where they're all speaking the same language is which part of the process is broken. So, right now, to use a biblical analogy, we are all babbling at each other in the historical sense because time, wait, what was it? Time to detect is the time it takes to detect. Thank you, very expensive vendor. I appreciate your thought piece. I'm glad that was included in my $300,000 annual fee, right? It's absurd. It's laughable, except that it's not, because this is my job. Like, I get up every day and I have to deal with this. And so, is this proposal, as I said, the right proposal? How if I know? But for those of you who very kindly contributed, I know it was purely out of pecuniary interest, but for those of you who spoke up and contributed, said, yes, I've worked in a SOC, yes, it's meantime, it's MTTR, which is resolve or respond. You can fight it out in the bar later. You're making my point for me. We need a common set of words so that we can measure, so that we can get better, because dwell time equals damage. And of the 4 things that a cyber professional does, the people who work in SOC and CIRT, our job primarily can be boiled down to the second of my 4 quadrants, which is reduce time to detect the adverse event that you could not prevent because time equals damage. That's it. So I invite you all to join me, blog, tweet, scream at each other, and for those of you who are fortunate enough in some ways to be on the enterprise side, start slapping your vendors around. I was one for 20 years. I've been in plenty of those meetings. Start demanding some clarity, because when a company that raised $100 million says, time to respond is the time to resolve an incident, and I'm going, so all I have to do is pick up the ticket and it's fixed? That's awesome, except it's wrong. And that was a thought piece by a company that people go, oh, look at that big booth over at RSA next week. You gotta be kidding me. If I can find the guy who wrote that blog, trust me, I'm gonna tackle him to the ground and slap him. Because this is my reality. This is the job I get paid to do, and it's ridiculous that I am getting paid what I cost to deal with this nonsense. So, please help. That's it. Q&A. Sir.
Question, is it time the wrong street map to look for things? Like, are we really trying to minimize damage?
Sorry, can you say that again?
So is it time the wrong street length for our keys? Like, are we trying to like minimize damage instead? And the function between, you said like time equals damage, like that's, in reality is a non-linear and not even differentiable function. And I think like the upside of my view was rather that we started talking about reality, what's actually happening, and like understanding where we get the damage, would that be the way to actually try it? How do we test it right?
Thank you. Let me restate it, and you tell me if I'm paraphrasing your question right for people to hear. Is time actually the right metric? Is the relationship between dwell time and damage linear? Certainly not. Is it case specific? Absolutely. Are there cases where dwell time is not really correlated to damage at all? You are absolutely right, and I'm guessing some background in mathematics. As a general statement for measuring performance of a SOC and an incident response team, I would argue that, and remember, we are not talking about preventative controls, right? This is detection and response. I invite you, I am not disagreeing with you, I invite you, please, if there are KPIs for a SecOps or incident response team that can be consistently measured across teams, across enterprises, and across industries over time that are not time-based, please add them to the model and show me where I'm wrong. In certain cases, yes, but I haven't made the leap you just made because I'm just not that smart.
So just to follow up on that, like my point is rather that the way you define these periods are like based on what you actually want to get out of this. One is easy to measure, like taxonomies. Like,
the drunk looking for his keys under the street lamp, as you said, right?
so that's why I say I like MITRE because we started talking about like what are the TTPs that are actually observed.
Me too. I heart MITRE.
That was the part that was driving the category system.
Yeah.
And if we start with the category system with time, I think we're missing that.
I don't disagree. I challenge you to answer the following question to me or to yourself or over a beer at the thing tonight, which is, how does MITRE help me measure the performance? Look, the average enterprise today, unless they're really large or have specialty needs like the defense industry, more and more folks find that they outsource their tier one SOC. Right? So I'm making up the numbers to make the math easy. I spend $1 million a year or $100,000 a month on a SOC. Do I keep them? Are they doing any good? Are they bad? If ReliaQuest comes in and says, we're better than Arctic Wolf, switch to us. And I go, oh, better sounds good. Same dollars, better for money, good. What's better? I don't know. I would argue that time certainly has a place in the evaluation. And please add non-time metrics to the thought.
I do agree, but if we create the measure, then people start to measure.
Everybody studies to the test, right?
So some metrics that I've seen asked by boards lately over the last few years have been not as much on the time to respond or anything else, more control efficacy. Because I've had several members say, I'm tired of every vendor saying their tool stops 99% of breaches, 100% of 0 days. And they're getting used to the fact that there will be incidents. So there's been a shift in time to acknowledge or time to respond and more. Why wasn't control effective, or how do you plan use cases? Have you thought of any types of metrics that can kind of standardize that can gauge control efficacy?
Absolutely. The question was, interest at the board level seems to be shifting from time performance to control efficacy. There's a marker, but you probably can't see it if I draw it on the board. But let me just say this very quickly. One, I 1,000,000% agree with you. I was speaking parochially about detective controls, SOC, and CIRT performance. Is that actually the set of metrics that anyone at the Mount Olympus level cares about? Absolutely not. Control, but you heard me say at the beginning, right? An unvalidated control is not a control, it's a hope, right? So, super quick, let me tell you how we run things on a daily op tempo Every morning, my Intel team meets. We have what we call the morning Intel stand-up. Everybody brings their coffee. We go through the overnights. Everybody's got their OSINT and their feeds and their vendors, and we go around the room. Phone, threat, TTPs, urgent exploits, whatever, geopolitical. We go around the room. We go, is there anything that we need to drop everything, worry about, right flipping now? If not, then we've got a backlog of interesting hypotheses we want to write the text for, we want to hunt. We draft something, we do a threat hunt on it, or a retro query, or whatever you call it on your tools. When it goes ding, we've got some sample data, we send it over to our SOC, they give us feedback, noise level, tune it this way, right? They figure out a playbook, we institutionalize it, sprinkle with holy water, call it production. They escalate an example to the CIRT team. The CIRT team goes, what do we do when we catch this thing they're pitching over the wall? They write their procedures and their playbooks and their XOR run books and all that stuff. And they go, great, for that kill chain campaign, whatever, we're good. Whether the control is detective or preventative. And then I go, great. And then I go, hey Andrew, the one who created the model if you don't like it. Hey Andrew, grab our attack simulation or a Python script you wrote or whatever. We use ATT&CK, but Red Canary or whatever, there's open source. I'm like, great, now go attack us with that. Because then what you get is, did the control actually go ding? How fast did it go ding? How soon did the analyst at our team or Sentinel-1 or CrowdStrike notice the thing to go ding? How long before they decided it was a thing or wasn't a thing? They asked all the stuff on that timeline. Helps the SOC manager manage the SOC and the CIRT manager manage the CIRT team. What the board wants to know is, did the attack succeed in the first place? And the answer should be no. See, I think you've hit on a gorgeous point. If I may, thank you. In a perfect world, none of the metrics I spent all this hour talking about would matter. You know why? Because all of the attempts would fail. And so, and by the way, on another day, another talk, or grab me in the bar, there are ways to actually get very close to achievable on that. I will give you one example that is incredibly hard to do at a large enterprise, but is in fact possible, which is application safe listing. Give everyone an iPad, and if it's not an app that's authorized, that's the end of the discussion. If it's not required, it's not allowed, it can't run, period. We have organizations in a commercial environment, in a threat landscape, where we hand people a general purpose computer connected to the entire internet and say, have at it. That is insane. But that's another talk. So to your point, yes, control effectiveness and the effectiveness of preventative controls that make everything I just talked about irrelevant is actually, he says, undermining his entire 24-year career. What I do shouldn't actually be the important part, and probably isn't, except that the guy to my left who runs all the preventative stuff, I'm speaking generically as an industry, not my friend who runs all the preventative stuff, have failed spectacularly. That's why I'm here, that's why I exist, that's why the 6 teams I oversee have a job. So yes, at the board level, none of this matters. I actually had a vendor CTO ask me the other day, so thanks for being our advisor, tell me, how do you talk to the board about what we do for you? And I looked at him and I said, Tom, I don't talk to the board about what you do. I don't talk to the board about what I do. My boss doesn't talk to the board about what I do. You know what the board wants to hear from the security guy? Were there any major incidents? Do I have to sign off personally on any of the compliance regs that we had something terrible happen? No? Get out. I'll see you in a year. That's what the board wants to know from cybersecurity, right? They want dial tone reliability and go away. That's what the board wants. Sorry, long answer to a short question. Anybody else? I think we have like 1 minute. Sir.
How does your B6 model play out with the last fast dribbled out, oh my god, it just got worse, oh my god, it just got worse? Because it feels like there's like several attacks that are all mums and then go together.
Last pass. What do you think about that? So, and this gets into another conference and another talk on third-party risk. So when something goes horribly wrong at a provider where I don't control the data, I don't control the network, I don't control the systems, I'm not aware of the incident, and I can't respond to the incident, I guess the answer is this model doesn't apply at all.
No, I'm saying if you were at LastPass,
Oh!
the breach of LastPass and the exfiltration of 20, 30 million vaults through a BYOD Plex server on a personal device at home for the SRE, how does that fit? Because it feels like there's more than one event that went on. They pivoted, they turned. The intentionality of the attacker isn't always focused in just one event, one breach, one fix.
Got it. So, long series of events, low and slow, all kinds of steps in the kill chain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I would argue, simplistically, and I haven't actually mapped the LastPass case to this in particular, it still started with an initial compromising event. Now, if it's an insider, that means abuse of privileges or access or an account. It means unauthorized activity by an authorized user. In the case of an outsider, it's unauthorized access and use. Here's another thought to the whole, quick aside, to the whole solving this systemically. Here's another thing. Almost nothing can be done maliciously on a network without an account. So we need to pay real close attention to how accounts are behaving. But I would argue that my clock for almost everything still starts when the insider misbehaved or the outsider gained initial access to an account and began to, as long as they behave exactly normally, there's no EUBA that's going to detect it and no compromise has happened. But the minute they start to behave strangely with those privileges, permissions, or account, that is when the clock starts. And then it's a question of, if each event over a series of events has its own, there was exfiltration, there was lateral movement, there was upload, there was low prevalence destination IP or domain or drop site or whatever, every one of those should have a chain on the model. Thank you for taking my money.